somewhere, and they saw me in my gear, probably thought I was a hooligan. It was the other way around. So, yeah.
Oh, that's dreadful. We're talking early 90s then, aren't we?
This is late 90s. Well,
was
early
it late
2000s.
90s? Of course, yeah, it was
2001,
Sylvester, yeah. It's dreadful, but I worked in Leeds throughout my time on the Yorkshire Post, and the hatred towards us. And I know we've got a section who hate Leeds back, but I do think the antipathy flows a lot more from the Leeds direction towards us, because we're the more successful of the two.
Absolutely, and I remember they were struggling at the time, and it was getting a little bit more. I think we'd gone away and won 4-3 when we had that big lead and let them get close, and then we'd won it again. And they did us a favor that year, obviously, when they went to Highbury and beat Arsenal.
That's right, yeah.
So I was just at the pub letting them know, thank you guys, thank you for helping us, win another champion. And I had the gentleman who owned the pub knew me well, and he's like, look, man, it's bad enough when you're here being the only Asian guy, just not right now, not when there's that many of them around. I can't get you any help. But it's gotten a lot better, at least after that. At least I felt that there's more diversity in the crowd now. You find people from different parts of the world coming in. I think a lot of that has died down. At least at Old Trafford, I felt that. I can't speak for other grounds. I've never been anywhere else, but I felt that there was less aggro from the other fans as well now.
Yeah, I've been to Leeds United at Elland Road, and that is not a good. It's a good experience to win there,
yeah.
But during the game, you're just on edge, and it's not good.
It's something Sir Alex talked about in his autobiography. I remember Ryan Giggs talking about it as well. How they'd be throwing stuff at the director's box and things like that. Like you said, the hate is very real, and so it would have been interesting had they made it up, or if they get promoted, because it's been a while, and it would be interesting.
It will be there. I believe it will be there, very sadly. And actually, I think it's worse between us and them than us and Liverpool.
Yeah.
In my experience, having been to matches, both those stadiums, as competitive as it is at Anfield, and it obviously is, there isn't the same threat level, I don't think, that you feel. You don't feel the same. It's just venomous. I mean, I actually went to the Leeds Manchester United Youth Cup final, second leg, in the year that we'd won the title in '93, and Robbie Savage was playing up front for United's youth team.
Yeah, he used to be a striker.
I took my son, who's a Manchester United fan, but I also took his best pal, who's a Leeds fan, and we were sat in one of the stands, and there was a gentleman allowing what I took to be about 7 or 8 year old son to do the old aeroplane thing, and they was singing "Who's That Dying on the Runway," and I said to him, do you really think you should be encouraging your son to sing a song about people dying? And he said it's just a bit of fun.
Yeah, it's just a bit of banter.
It's not a bit of fun. And he just said, well, if you don't like it, F off.
Oh, so, lovely.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's in a sort of family atmosphere. And I stayed there because I don't know if you remember, I think hadn't they won the first leg at Old Trafford? So we were up against it. So I wanted to stay because my son's friend, David, was a Leeds fan. And, I knew they were going to win it. So I wanted him to see them get the cup. But otherwise, I would have just walked out with my son.
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't have blamed you.
But yeah, I think that will be there. I think it will be there next season if they do come up.
Yeah.
Sad to say.
Okay, Chris, Trad is here as well.
Hi guys.
This is Chris.
Hi there, Trad. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? I just didn't want to intervene. The conversation was really interesting, so I was just hearing along.
Are we going to have
you on the show?
Thank you. Are we going to have a protocol? Is there something that you want? A system whereby we're not talking over one another? Do you have a system for that? Because I'm a golf guy, is what I'm trying to say.
It's going to be just. I don't think anyone will intervene. Everyone will get a chance to talk as well, so it's not going to be confusing.
No, but if you do need a signal to shut me up, then just
no.
Just give it.
We would be only too happy to let you keep going on.
Yeah.
You say that now.
We'll say it later
in
also.
another half an hour or so.
In another half an hour, you'll be the only one getting all the questions as well. I think it'll be you and then Brad, and I'll be right at the bottom of that. I think the kids are sick of me by now, having seen me for the better part of a month. They're like my wife; they're sick of me now.
Maybe they might want to question about their photos. My children very kindly got me their signed photos of both Sheringham's goal and Solskjaer's goal in Barcelona.
Wow! That's brilliant.
So, pretty pleased with those.
That's fantastic.
So, it's quite amazing, actually. In the winning goal over here, I'm slightly suspicious it's been photoshopped. He swoop on the ball is pointing perfectly towards the camera as it nestles in the top of the net. Now, for that to have happened is just phenomenal from Nike's point of view. So I'm a little suspicious it might have been doctored, but that's the cynical journalist in me.
Yeah, there you go.
So how long have you guys all been supporting, obviously a lot younger, been supporting the Reds?
I'll go first, and I think it's been about 16, 17 years.
Right.
Yeah. What about you, Tarad?
I started supporting us in the year Chelsea actually won the league in 2005, 2006. So, I still remember the Gallo scoring in the first 5 minutes and then Joe Cole going through our defense like anything. So, that was my first season, but I fell in love with the club in 2005-06, and I've been supporting ever since then.
Good stuff.
So for me, it's interesting because I grew up in London, did not have a team, did not pick a team. Actually didn't like football when I was growing up that much, and was gifted a closed, wrapped Liverpool flag, Liverpool kit and everything that I just returned, never opened it. It just kept lying in one part of my room because I said,
"You're my hero."
Yep. Never opened, never even looked at it. And then I decided, of all seasons in 94, 95, when we lost the league and the FA Cup final, and all I got from everybody around me was that what a bad choice. United are finished. You fluked your way to 2 Premier League titles. You win nothing with kids. And it's been a love affair ever since. And I wouldn't have it. I mean, even with all the pain, wouldn't have it any other way. It's just brilliant.
Okay, so guys, I have Chris with me tonight, and if you have any questions, then you can submit them to Facebook. I'll keep checking for the comments during the call, and obviously, if you have any questions, then I'll put them forward to Chris. So, Chris, we've all answered. How about you? What was your first season supporting United?
My first season was, it started at the end of the season, really. I was born in Manchester, but my family moved. They were from London. I'd gone up there for my dad's work, and then they moved back when I was 4. I was born in 1955. And I would probably have been a Tottenham fan, but for the fact that it was on FA Cup final day when Spurs were going for the double in 1961. And I'd got interested in football. And a friend was encouraging me to be a Spurs fan because I lived in Chingford, which is right on the edge of Edmonton, North London. We were walking down the shops on Cup final day and all the rosettes were in the shops. And I said to Mum, I can't remember my friend's name. He says I should be a Spurs fan. And I remember my mum stopped in her tracks, turned round to me and said, no. And then she told me all about the Munich air crash. And she recalled having stood out on the streets to get the first edition of the morning paper to find out what had happened. And she said, Manchester United are your team. And I've thanked her every day of my life since because
absolutely, she's a hero.
She is
hero.
Absolutely. Although
100%.
I did go and see Tottenham a lot in my youth because I had a neighbour who, when his friend couldn't go on a season ticket, used to take me. So, I used to see Greaves and Gilzean and Mike England, Dave Mackay, and that. But that was how. So, strictly speaking, my first season was 61, 62. Which
amazing.
Is a long time ago. Amazing I'm still alive.
No, amazing that you've been following the Reds, I guess, for longer than the other three of us put together, and so many more that we would know. Because in Pakistan, you know, it's still in its infancy for a lot of young people. The game really only came here in the early to mid 90s with satellite TV, and at that time, of course, United were doing well. And then a lot of people, I think Trad and Ismaeel will back me up on this, a lot of people started watching football when Barcelona started winning stuff. And then that's all they know. They just know Messi, and, you know, you try and tell them about, you know, the United's achievements, and they're like, well, what's so big about winning a treble? We win one every time. And it's like, yeah, there's a difference between winning a treble in a competitive league and winning one in, you know, I mean, there's not much understanding of the history of football and stuff. And as you would know, you know, Pakistanis are cricket obsessed, and it's cricket, nothing else. But football's now suddenly becoming big, and there's so much of it here. I mean, I know how much work Ismaeel has put into, I mean, I don't think you can measure the amount of hours this boy put into making this dream a reality. I never thought there would be an official fan club in Pakistan. Never in my life. I just didn't think we'd have the people. And it's grown from strength to strength to go to screenings and, you know, getting letters from Louis van Gaal and things like that. It's taken a lot of effort, and it just shows you that the interest is peaked. And I remember being younger, and there was grounds and nobody wanted to play football. And if I would show up in my Man United kit, most people would ask me, oh, is that Brazil? Or is that Argentina? And I would go, no, it's Manchester United. And now the boys would back me up on this. I think you see a kit every second, third person on the road or somewhere. You would see so many kits of different football clubs. It's become a part of the fabric. So we've seen that change. I've seen that change in my relatively short lifetime. So it's amazing. You know, what you have seen, for us, it's an education, just hearing about it, just learning about it.
As Hassan quite rightly pointed out, football in Pakistan is relatively new. Chris's son David is also a United fan, and obviously Chris has had generations passed on through the United colours as well. But with me, for example, I'm the only one in my family who supports United, and my son is also going to be a United fan as well. Same with Hassan, and obviously Gerard got married last year, so hopefully the same for him soon as well.
Absolutely the same.
Well, in fairness, I always
getting a bit too ahead of ourselves, aren't we?
Nope, not when it comes to this.
I did allow my children a choice. I said, you have the choice. You can be a Manchester United fan, or you can go without pocket money if you support another club. Now that's giving them an option, isn't it? And that was their option.
Yeah.
Fortunately, they all chose to be United fans. But we used to go to games as a family. We were members, so during the 90s we probably got, I would think, 15, 16 games a season. But you would, as they got more and more successful, it became more and more difficult, because obviously you were balloted out. So you had to rely on getting in the ballot early in the season, and then you had, you know, sort of enough tokens or enough cash out, whatever it was, to be considered later on. Because unfortunately, it's not a free ballot. They definitely do, you know, they favour people that have been a long time, and they also look for people. You know, very suspicious that they track your credit card spendings in the megastore. If you spend a lot of money there, you're going to get invited back. And that's the truth of it, I'm afraid. They may deny it, but I'm absolutely certain.
It's definitely that. I think I got lucky within that my brothers followed me, and it just became an obsession. And for my grandparents were still living in the UK at the time, it just became the most normal thing for my grandmother, who wouldn't have the foggiest clue what a football looks like, was to go to a sports store in the beginning of every August or September and buy the latest kit and mail it to Pakistan. And she just knew she had to do it every year, and, you know, put all of our names on the back. And it was hilarious in that sometimes she'd run into people and they're like, what are you doing? She's like, oh, I'm out buying a Manchester United shirt with Sylvester at the back. And they were like, what? You're like 80 years old and from Pakistan. What do you know about this? And she's like, hey, man, things you have to do to keep your grandkids on site. And so it's just such a beautiful continuation of things. My mom knows, my grandparents know. my wife, when she was my girlfriend, my first present from her was a Roy Keane shirt. That was the very first Manchester United shirt that I bought, and she had it sent over from someone she knew was living in Oxford at the time. And I think I used to wear it to games, and my brother would wear it when we were playing games, and then it's had some wear and tear, and now I've like got it like a family heirloom, which I'm hoping to pass on to my son one day, because for me, Keno was nothing short of, he was everything. He was my captain, fantastic. So he was the best for me. So
okay, so Chris, we have a good question from Mans here. I shared a few of the photos you sent over to me. Explain what happened in the photo with Dennis Law.
Yeah, Dennis Law. Hassan was just talking there about Roy Keane being his favourite. I don't know what it was about the team of the 60s with the holy trinity of George Best, Bobby Charlton, Dennis Law. Dennis Law was the player that attracted me, and just he became my absolute hero. I actually used to, as a forerunner to becoming a journalist, I would soak up every match report I could of Manchester United, and I would rewrite it to concentrate on Dennis Law, because he was my idol. Well, when I got into journalism, and I was the first time I was a sports editor, Dennis had become very popular as being one of the first analysts on what I think it was then Radio 2 that matches were broadcast on. So I contacted the BBC and said, was there any chance I could interview Dennis? And they said, yeah, come up, you can spend the day with us. And it happened to be the Manchester Derby. So I went up and I spent the day with Dennis, and I was in the commentary box with him. We lost 1-0, unfortunately. And I just had a wonderful time with him. And I'd taken up this book that I wrote as a kid, this scrapbook, and I sort of see how the day went. And I have to say, Dennis, he just lived up. They say you shouldn't meet your heroes, but he lived up to everything. Such a great guy. So I showed him this book, and he kept thanking me, for having written all this, not to keep it, but just that anybody should be that interested. And I think that shows the level of humility that Dennis had and still has, I'm sure. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful day for me. So I did use my position to engineer a meeting with him. But so that was, I've got several photos that were taken with him. And he's actually, as a journalist, you try not to ask for autographs because you're in a privileged position, but you're in a professional position. But Dennis Law is one of probably 5 people whose autographs I've asked for while in a professional capacity, because I couldn't pass it up. So I have a signed photo of Dennis. So that was the day I met Dennis Law, and he's just an absolute gentleman, and he was an amazing player. He just, I mean, Ronaldo's good in the air, but Dennis Law was, because he's not as tall as Ronaldo, and not that tall, but probably about 5'10", Dennis, 5'10 and a half. But he just used to hang in the air. And of course, the bicycle kick was something that he almost invented. He was famous for it. So yeah, it was one of the, outside of my children being born, that's probably one of the happiest days of my life.
Yeah, I can understand. We have another question from Munib Jan as well. We don't have much footage available of the yesteryears. If you can please describe George Best as a player, and which modern player would you compare him to? George
Best was. It is so difficult because unless you saw him play, I mean, we do have some footage of him, and I'm sure you guys have all seen the footage that we have got of him. The thing that strikes me most about him is probably not his dribbling ability, which was insane, but his strength. I mean, he played in an era when the pitches were a lot more sapping than they are now. So I don't know if you guys have seen the photos. There's one my father took from the stand at Stratford End, and you can see what the pitch was like, what the pitches were. So the pitches were more demanding on the stamina and the physique. But the players were just allowed to get away with so many fouls before they would be booked. But Best was just so strong. You guys, if you haven't seen it, check out a goal that George scored against Chelsea in, I believe it was a League Cup game at Old Trafford, a midweek League Cup match on a muddy pitch, where Ron the Chopper Harris and I think probably Dave Webb, they both try and bring him down. They actually do bring him almost to his knees at one stage inside the penalty area. And George retains his balance, gets up, makes mugs of them and puts it in the back of the net. So he had all, I mean, Ryan Giggs, I won't say suffered comparisons because Giggsy, you know, you have to make a case for Giggs being our all-time greatest player. If you look at the number of medals he's got, it's difficult to argue against it. But in comparative terms, he had, like Ryan Giggs' ability, just to change direction in an instant that most defenders could not stand up with. And allied to that was that he just kept the ball at his feet, like Messi does. I mean, and we're probably not going to get into the debate Messi versus Ronaldo here, because I know where my vote's going to go. But Messi, you know, I think we all have to accept that his close control is phenomenal. And George Best was like that. He just kept the ball under his control all of the time. I'd say he didn't quite have the pace that Ryan Giggs did when Giggs was there. He was quick. He was just almost untouchable when he had a mind for it. But he did unfortunately tend on occasion to just stray mentally, it seemed almost. That's a young child looking on and making that assessment. I might be completely wrong. But it did seem that he would disappear. He might have seen a good-looking woman in the crowd. You know, that was a possibility with George. Because all of those tales are... some may be made up, but a lot of them are true. But
that takes me to my
Say again, sorry.
That takes me to my next question. Your encounter with George Best. I saw that picture as well, where he mentioned you. So, what was that all about?
Well, that was I've always been writing. Right as an early age, I did writing of all sorts. You know, fiction and other stuff. As I've mentioned, they did the thing about Dennis Law. And one of the things I used to do was write a lot of letters to football magazines. Well, I'm not sure if you guys will remember Jimmy Hill, who, if you haven't heard the name before, Jimmy was a footballer who helped bring about the break of the maximum wage back in the day, in the 60s, I believe it was, early 60s, when £100 a week was the maximum footballers could get paid. Well, he brought about that. He later became a big influence in football. He was responsible for 3 points for a win instead of 2. He was the man who championed that. He was also chairman of Coventry City. But he had for a brief while, he had his own football magazine. And that was one of several that I used to write letters to regularly. And George Best wrote a column. Well, I wrote a letter in 1968 in October, I think it was, because United were getting, as now, you know, United get glorified when they win because it sells papers, and now it gets web hits. And they get if they lose because it sells papers and gets web hits. And it was just the same then. And we were getting a lot of stick because we'd lost to Estudiantes in the World Club Championship. So I wrote a letter pointing out our European record. And it was picked on by whoever wrote George's column with him. My letter was picked up, and he quoted me on that. And I can still remember opening the magazine that Friday morning when I got it at home, looking through. First of all, being excited because I saw my letter had been printed, and then to see that George Best had mentioned my name. So I like to try and tell the anecdote without just say, "Oh yeah, George used to talk about me," but make it sound as if he'd seen me play football. But that's not true. So yeah, so it was a good moment. But it's only recently, I don't know, you've seen the crosshead that says knockers, which it's only sort of 50 years on. I realised that there'd been a bit of innuendo in that. I hadn't. It refers to the people that were knocking us, but I had a schoolboy smirk recently because it's just inside my front door. I've got it framed there now. So yeah, that was how that came about. But it was I lauded it at school that day. I can tell you, I took the magazine in and stopped everybody that I could. Oh yeah, George Best had mentioned me. Have a look at this.
Okay,
so while we're on the Chris,
George
while we're on the
did once towels of my hair as well.
Yeah.
I got his. Sorry, go on.
Sorry to cut you across. While we're on the subject of George Best, there's a very popular news story people don't really believe it, but I'd like you to answer that. Somebody mentioned to George Best that Johan Cruyff is the best player in the world. And then when Ireland were facing Holland, and then George went on and nutmegged Cruyff in the game and then a signal to the crowd. Did that actually happen, or is that just hearsay?
No, I believe he did. I believe he did do that. Although, well, strangely, if I'm pushed on who's the greatest player that I've seen in the flesh, Cruyff as the Dutch. I have 3 Dutch cousins, and Cruyff apparently is the Dutch pronunciation of his name, but Cruyff, as we know him, Cruyff probably is the most technically gifted player that I've seen. So, but yes, I do believe that did happen. That he did go out deliberately to not make him. But on the flip side of that, there was a player called Peter Marinello who joined Arsenal from Hibernian back in, it would have been the late 60s, early 70s. It might have been early 70s because George was possibly on the wane in terms of United because the alcohol was really the alcohol intake was kicking in. But I remember going to a game because we tried to get Marinello as well. We didn't. He went to Arsenal. And I went to a game at Highbury and it was just Marinello versus George Best. And they were just trying as hard as they could to take the mickey out of the other one. And whenever they got the ball, the game was less important to them than trying to nutmeg or get past the other player. And sad to say, my recollection is that Marinello actually got the better of it that day.
Wow.
So look up Peter Marinello. He was similar in that, he had a long dark hair and a very lean player, but very very gifted player. But yeah, so I think personal matters did take over sometimes with George, but still just an unbelievable player and so important to Manchester United's success. And to me, as you can see from the picture that I've got, my children got me on the wall.
Okay, so Hassan, do you have any question?
Yeah, actually, there's a couple of things I wanted to pick Chris's brain about. One is the fact that when Sir Alex came in, we keep hearing about the drinking culture being there at Manchester United and how a lot of the players were moved on because he felt that they were very involved. But I kept reading in a lot of autobiographies, Keane's and the others, that the subculture was there for some time yet. Even through the most successful period. So was it just a case of Sir Alex using that as an excuse to get rid of players he didn't necessarily like? Because apparently Robbo liked his drink, and Gary Pallister liked his drink, and Brucey liked his drink. Kino, we all know, did. So they all stuck around for some time and were a part of that success. But obviously, Paul McGrath was having his issues with injuries as opposed to not just his drinking. So do you think that was just Sir Alex laying down the law, but not necessarily to all of them? It's not like he got rid of everybody who used to drink at the club.
No, I think he used it as a way, I feel, to stamp his mark and to make them fearful, which is the way that he did rule. He knew which players he could rule by fear and which players he could rule by sort of sucking up to. I mean, Eric is the classic example. Eric was allowed to do whatever he wanted. I mean, Fergie had very strict laws. If you look back at any footage of the team either arriving or leaving the ground at away matches, you'd see all the United players in their jackets, their blazers, nice white shirt. And then Eric would just be wearing whatever the damn hell he wanted. And he was allowed to get away with that. And I think, going back there earlier, that was exactly it that he did. There were players, and I mean, I have personal experience. I've fortunate to spend an evening with Brian Robson. It was in the green room of a TV show called Surprise, Surprise, which ran in England for many years, was hosted by a former pop star called Cilla Black, which was, as the name suggests, where people, members of the public, were surprised on certain things. So Brian was one of the guests. And he did his little bit of filming, but then came up to the green room. This would have been a Wednesday in the mid-'80s. So United didn't have a game there. I forget who, there was a match on and we stood talking. But I would have seen him drink something like 8 pints in an evening during the season in midweek. which I found astounding. I still find it astounding that anybody can drink 8 pints in that time anyway. But for a professional athlete, so there clearly was that culture, but it was within football. It's been publicised since. But I used to come to Shilton. He had a drink problem throughout his career, but Fleet Street back then, the journalists, they wouldn't report on it. The sports reporters certainly wouldn't, and even the news reporters, they turned a blind eye to it. So, but coming back to what you say, yeah, I do think that there was a culture there, but that was a culture that was in virtually every club. It was what teams did. All good cliches are based on truth, and the cliche of the footballer back in the 60s and 70s doing his training in the morning and then going to the snooker club or the golf club and then out on the beer in the evening, it happened. I mean, I can actually remember having an argument with my uncle who had met Dennis Law and Bobby Charlton when they came to Huddersfield to do a charity thing, and my uncle telling me that Bobby Charlton and Dennis Law not only drank but smoked as well. And as a child who thought I'd never ever smoke because it would stunt my growth, and I found out that didn't matter anyway. Other things were going to stunt that. I was absolutely shocked, and shamefully I called my uncle a liar, and I said that no way would footballers smoke, but they did. They smoked and they drank, and that carried on until the 80s, and probably into the Premier League when the money started getting that much greater. I think everybody decided that they needed to look after their bodies a lot more. That's not to say they all drank by any means, but yeah, he was then selective, and he decided. I mean, there was no way that he could get rid of Robbo. Just what a player! What a player! I watched recently when the games against Liverpool, the semi-finals in the FA Cup back in '79, and again in was it '85? Jeez, that guy, absolutely amazing.
Captain Marvel.
Okay, so Chris, obviously you've seen a lot of transitions. The first one after Sir Matt Busby left, Wilf McGuinness came in, and then that barren period, you can say, until Sir Alex came in. So what similarities do you see in those transitions after Sir Matt Busby left, Sir Alex Ferguson came, Sir Alex Ferguson left, and then up till now?
Do you mean with the transition we're going through at the moment under Ollie?
Yeah, under Ole, and then if you were fortunate enough to experience the transition after Sir Matt Busby left, how was the mood at the club? How was the prospects, and how was everything?
Yeah, it was very difficult, and they made the mistake, as you guys will know if you've looked at history of appointing from within. And Wilf McGuinness, was a very good coach, and you'd probably liken him to Brian Kidd, maybe, would be very good working with someone and working for a number one, but he wasn't good enough. He wasn't strong enough, probably, on his own. Added to which, Sir Matt Busby was still down the corridor. He still had his office down the corridor, so he was never really freed of him. And I think that was the big problem that United had. And we lost, George Best. We lost, and then when Tommy Docherty came in, we got rid of other people. I mean, I was 19, and I remember I have to admit I cried when they announced on Grandstand on BBC television on the Saturday that Dennis Law was leaving Manchester United. I just couldn't believe it. It was just staggering. But yeah, the feeling was, and reading about it since, I do believe that so much was invested in the club and by the players, particularly Bobby Charlton and the managers Matt Busby, in winning the European Cup to honour the Busby Babes, the guys who died. I mean, if you look at the footage of immediately after the European Cup final victory over Benfica, no euphoria on the face of Bobby Charlton. There's almost not even a smile. Him and Bill Fuchs, you just feel that all they were thinking was 10 years back and what had happened and what might have happened with that team that had. And I think that carried on for some years, it was almost as if, you know, they'd reached that pinnacle, they'd done that. And I'm not saying there wasn't the desire to go on and do more, but maybe there wasn't quite the passion and quite the heart in it. And maybe we suffered with that in 2013 after Fergie left. I mean, who in their right mind would have wanted that job? I mean, I would have liked to have seen Eric Cantona get the job. Can you imagine Eric taking over as boss? What a ride it would be. We all knew that it would be a decline for, you know, hopefully a short period, but at least a very enjoyable ride. But the thing that there are similarities in that we'd reached that peak, and it is difficult to get up there and do it again. But I am encouraged now that maybe we've hit the bottom and are coming back. I mean, hitting the bottom is relative. As I mentioned, I was at Leyton Orient in Division 2, or Championship as it would now be called. So I always tell my kids that, you know, these are still great times. They're still amazing times, but it is all comparative. And if all you've seen is virtually all you've seen is success, then it's difficult to accept some of the things that have gone on. But I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'm as excited as hell about Bruno Fernandes. I just cannot believe the difference that he made in the few games that he played. You could see it in the other people around, and I do think it's fair. It's early, but fair to compare the effect that Eric had when he came in '92 to what Bruno Fernandes can do for United in. I'm having to think of the year 2020, because it's just such a weird year now, isn't it? So trying to think where we are. But yeah, I do see similarities there. And also in investing in youth. I mean, you possibly follow the guys on Twitter who list how many games in a row we've had included a youth team player. There can't be any club that gets anywhere near that, and yet we get criticised for buying players, buying success. There can't be anybody near to that.
The thing that it always surprises me is how much we got criticized, still continue to get criticized for the business side of things. And yet every single club you see in the Premier League today is copying what Manchester United was doing way back in the 90s. Everyone's got a mega store. Everyone's following, you know, things the way they were done by United. It's like you said, United sells papers. United is the news. Whether it's United doing well, it's United not doing well. If it's something linked, you want your news to be big, you just link it to United. I've seen entire reports on the internet, in newspapers, on radio channels for games between Liverpool and Manchester City, talking about Manchester United. It just amazes me. And I'm like, I thought we were irrelevant now. I thought you said we don't matter and we're irrelevant and we're has-beens. Yet 80% of your conversation in a game that's between Liverpool and Manchester City is about us and what we can do and cannot do and did do and spend. I mean, it's okay for them to talk about spending money, because apparently Manchester City have not spent any money. You know, they sign youth products. And Alisson was born and raised in Liverpool, and so was Virgil van Dijk. But Manchester, I mean, I'm seeing people criticize Harry Maguire, and I'm like, the guy's had a quarter of a season. He's definitely shown leadership. United, he's not come into a team that was doing that well, and he's really shored up. He's done his job. It's not his job to go out there and score the goals. His job is to shore up the back line. He's done that. He's done reasonably well. And suddenly he's being compared to Van Dijk, who's to a team that was cruising at that time that he came in. He's a phenomenal signing for Liverpool. I'm not taking that away. But he came into a side that was cruising and lost both the league title and the Champions League final. But he got he had nothing to do with it. Apparently the midfield wasn't good enough or whatever. But with Harry Maguire, the expectations, had Harry Maguire signed for Liverpool, put in the same kind of performances he's put in for us, people would have been pushing him to be one of the players of the season, or they would have been saying, right, that's the first name on my centre back, the first centre back on my team of the year. But because he's got a United shirt on, apparently he has to have 38 clean sheets, 26 goals, and 27 assists just to be considered. It's like the 99 season. I can't believe Ginola, of all people, won that year when every single person in Manchester United's midfield was playing at a level that hadn't been seen in England for years. And then the player of the year is David Ginola. I mean, you look at Nemanja Vidic in recent years, and I'm hearing people tell me, oh, he doesn't get into the team of the year ahead of the likes of John Terry or someone else. It baffles, but then it's that hatred, it's that bias, and it's that at the same time it's that obsession. You know, I love it. It's my favorite thing in the world to say to people now. You know, hated, adored, never ignored, because it does not apply truer to anyone than it does to Manchester United.
No, you're right, and it's something that's always been there. Although it has flipped around. I remember I wrote an article for the Yorkshire Post in 2011 ahead of the European Cup final at Wembley, remarking on the difference between 1968, when we were going into a European Cup final at Wembley as English representatives, and 2011, and how it had turned around completely because of the Munich air crash back in '68. Virtually the entire country was united behind United. You know, they really did want us to win. Whereas in 2011, you and I know, if you're not a Red, you know, nobody. And I'm guilty to an extent myself, because I have to put my hand up and say there's no way that I want Liverpool ever to win the Champions League. My partner can't understand me. You know, she says, but they're English. I don't care. You know, I don't want them winning that. So I understand from that perspective, but there definitely is it's envy, and I don't remember when Liverpool were so dominant that there wasn't the same degree of envy and jealousy directed towards them. But I think it is because we are the biggest and most well-known club in the world. Real Madrid are more successful. Barcelona are more successful. There's no disputing that. But if it came down to which is the most well-known and the biggest, and part of that probably is in the Munich air crash, then that's woven into fabric. In Juventus, but for some reason it didn't have quite the same resonance that you know, dying on a snow-covered runway in Munich did have. But yeah, there is, in my experience as well, there is an area within the media, and they will help shape it. Playing devil's advocate or trying to be balanced, there will be a bias the other way, as was exampled by me presenting the readers of a paper in Essex with an article about a Manchester United legend and his radio works. So one example of me being a hypocrite, not the only one. But yeah, you're right, Hassan. It is. There's a definite, just an intense dislike of us, but we'll just grow with it. We'll have to you feed off it
Absolutely.
like Millwall do. Millwall are the template for that. They just don't give a damn what people think about them. So, but yeah, we've just got to put up with it, and we've just got to get back. I mean, I remember I worked in Leeds, so you can imagine how awful the 91-92 season was for me, and having to bear that defeat. But 92-93, when we finally won it, I can remember going down to stone the pages off back in the days before everything was done on computers. And all these people going up and saying, oh, yeah, well, it's 26 years since you won it. It'll be another 26 years since you win it again. Yeah, who's smiling now?
Okay, so Chris, my next question was, yeah. Go on, sorry.
No, sorry, you carry on.
Okay, my next question was going to be the effect of social media, obviously. You've been a journalist, so obviously you've encountered and experienced a lot of it. The effect of social media on the players, on the managers, and on United in general. For example, in the past, if Sir Alex or Sir Matt Busby made doubtful decisions, then there wasn't any social media around to question them or put pressure on them. But right now, everyone has Twitter, everyone has Facebook, everyone has social media. So the pressure has increased, and the scrutiny has increased as well. Do you see any difference between now and in the past? I mean, obviously there was no social media back then, but was the criticism the same?
It wasn't on the same level. It couldn't be, because obviously people didn't have the same voice that they've got now. You know, if to express something, you did what I did, was write a letter to either your local paper, or, you know, that covered a team, or to a football magazine. But I think we'll all probably agree that social media has got a lot of wonderful aspects to it, but it also has some severe negative sides. And one of those is allowing people to just vent their anger and their ignorance, I feel, often in just a most vile way. And if I was a player, I certainly wouldn't want to be on Twitter, even if I was a high-profile player and my agent said this is good for you, because of all the. If I can give you one example of, you know, like, I'm a nobody, an absolute nobody, but I was targeted. I was sent death threats by Manchester City fans because I laughed about the fact that Etihad is actually Arabic for United. It means together, United. So I got death threats over that.
From all 5 of them.
And I got, yeah. And I don't know if you remember the game. When we won the cup in 2016, we started off with a Saturday evening third-round game at Sheffield United. I was there. Yeah. And within the first minute, Sheffield United were time wasting, and obviously, you know, saw that as their only way to get something, to get a replay. They would hope maybe, and it was just really poor. So we won with a late penalty, and I just happened to comment on Twitter that, you know, I felt that Sheffield United got what they deserved because they're actually a better team than they showed themselves to be. I got a response from one Sheffield United fan who copied my profile picture from Twitter, reposted it to all his followers, and said, "Doesn't this look like the face of a man who would sniff children's bicycle seats?" Now, if someone can bother to be so, I know, unreal. And it really hurt, and it really angered me. And my first reaction was, I'm going to sue that guy. But then I thought, no, you know, he wants a reaction, whatever it is. Exactly. But if you can imagine you're a player, and the sort of stuff, even if you know it's from opposition fans, saying the vilest things about you and your family, I wouldn't be able to cope with it. I really wouldn't. So if I was a manager, I would try to keep players off it as much as I could. But it must influence to a certain extent. It has to have an influence. Yeah. And that's what people want, isn't it? I mean, we've seen managers get sacked as a result of Facebook and Twitter. I'm sure we have. You know, it can't be coincidental. You get knee-jerk reactions. So it was a lot different, and not necessarily for the better. But it's something that we have to have. I mean, newspapers would be, or publishers would be, dying at a quicker rate than they are if it wasn't for what they can engender now. I mean, the newspaper sales have just plummeted. Sorry, I feel like I've veered from your original question, Ismaeel.
So how do you deal with the criticism on your social media about United? Because you've seen United on the up, on the down, and then on the up again, and down again, and currently whatever it is right now. But how do you deal with the, obviously, criticism on social media that you see, that if a player misses a chance, then he's criticized and the fan wants him sold, and if David De Gea lets in a goal, then he should be sold? And obviously, I'm talking about patience. Was there a lack of patience before as well, or this is something completely new?
It's difficult to say, because obviously going right back, you know, I remember when the only matches that we had shown live, if you discount the World Cup finals and the European Championships every 4 years, the only games we had here in England shown live were the FA Cup final, generally in May. Then the following 3 weeks, you would have the home internationals featuring England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. And those matches would be shown. They were the only matches that were shown live. Match of the day would have, at most, the highlights from 2 games. So people didn't see as much as they see now. So they weren't able... Any criticism we did have was probably not coming from the same level of intelligence, as it were, in information, the amount of information. But it also meant that you didn't criticise as much because you had less to go at. Now, where we can see, if we want, and if you've got the time, you can see certainly every game of your favourite club and others as well. I think it's made people believe that they're as good as the managers, and they know as much as the managers. They know as much as the people in the game. There are a lot of you, because I put my hands up, and I'm not just saying that, Ismaeel, you're one of the guys, along with my son David, who on Twitter, who when you talk, when you say something, I really listen to, and I think you speak. Both of you tend not to speak with too much emotion in, and tend to analyse things. But I think the trouble is we do, because we've got that ability now to say something, we say it all too quickly, possibly in the heat of the moment, and possibly it's something that you might regret having put out there. To just criticise, you said David De Gea, get rid of him because he's let one goal in. No, so there certainly wouldn't have been that back when I first started following football in the 60s and the 70s. It would just be confined to the terraces when you went there, and people would shout out criticism. And I remember Harry Redknapp, for some reason, the chant that was always aimed at Harry Redknapp was, "Harry, where's your handbag?" I don't know, it was just that the rival fans would just sing it, "Harry, where's your handbag?" I've got no idea why. But maybe it's just because it's alliterative. But that was the worst thing that you would get. But you wouldn't get. I mean, I've actually had arguments at Old Trafford with fellow United fans, and it's probably very pathetic of me, but I did take I took a mini dictionary one day to a match after having a ruck one game with the guy, and I handed it to him, and he said, "What's that?" And I said, "That's a dictionary." He said, "What's that for?" I said, "I just thought you might like to look up the verb to support." And he just, "Oh, fuck off." But you even see it in the Stratford end where, people are just shouting at the players. And my argument is that I can't believe any player has ever played better in a game when they're getting abuse from their own fans. If you're getting it from the opposition, then that's going to boost you, but not from the home. I mean, I was lucky. A couple of years ago, I met Alan Shearer, and I confessed I was a United fan, and I confessed that I'd given him crap from the Stratford end, and he laughed and he said, "Oh." He said, "I thought I recognised your voice." But he confirmed. He said, wherever he went, particularly Old Trafford, all it made him want to do was play harder and play better. Yeah. And I said, and the only reason we were saying that is because we were desperate for you to have signed for us.
Yeah.
We wanted him to give, but we wouldn't have got Eric.
No.
And if Dion Dublin hadn't broken his leg, we probably wouldn't have got Eric. So, things are meant to be. But can I go off at a tangent here? It was very interesting. If you don't mind. Alan did go into Alan. Look at me, mates with Alan. Mr. Shearer. Mr. Shearer did, without any sort of provocation from me, went into talking about 1992, when obviously we were after him, and so were Blackburn, so were Arsenal. And he spoke to Ferguson, and he said he spoke to Alex at some length, and he was very keen to join us. But he told him that Blackburn had made this fairly phenomenal offer. And Alex Ferguson said to him, "Well, the board just won't give me the money, Alan." And Alan Shearer said to him, "Well, if you want me, Alex, then you'll make them give you the money." He said, "But I've got to give my 2 weeks." So he gave him that 2 weeks, didn't hear back from Alex Ferguson, went to Blackburn, which is perfectly understandable. He's a professional footballer. He was on ridiculous money at Blackburn. But I tell you, what a top guy for someone that I've given so much stick to from the Stratford end. He's a really very, very decent guy and a nice guy.
But
such a big guy.
Wouldn't you say, Chris, sorry to jump in again, but wouldn't you say that what we ended up pulling up on Blackburn by getting Keno when they had him done and dusted on Friday evening, I think we won that war. We won that particular war, didn't we? We did so much better without getting Shearer, who, of course, he was a phenomenal player. We would have all have loved him.
Yeah.
But I think the fact that we ended up getting Keane over them is what allowed us to continue to be successful, because I think Keane brought a mindset. And he said the same thing. He said, you know, it was a done deal. He told Dalglish, if you have the papers, I'll sign them. And Dalglish said, no, it's okay, go home. And then Sir Alex sniffed that opportunity. And, you know, I've read in both of Kino's books. He said once Sir Alex called me, it was game over. He's not going to sign for Kenny Dalglish.
Yeah. It makes him a hero, if nothing else. Just turning down Dalglish. Yeah, I agree. That was a phenomenal. Interesting thing, but I didn't get a chance to talk about '96. But you guys will know of David Meek, the Manchester Evening News football writer, who he actually fell into the Manchester United job because of the Munich air crash, the tragedy. He was a news reporter, David, but was assigned to that and then did it. And I used to know David quite well. And David told me that in '96. Because, you know, we went in for Shearer again in '96. This was when Shearer had signed the new contract, but had, look, I've gone back to calling him Shearer instead of my mate Al. My mate Al, he'd signed a new contract with Jack Walker, the Blackburn chairman, but on the gentleman's understanding that if he wanted to go somewhere else, then he could. So in '96, we actually got so far as showing Alan Shearer, Sir Alex Ferguson showed Alan Shearer all around Old Trafford, around the training ground, and Alan Shearer apparently asked Alex, "Who are you selling then? Are you getting rid of Cantona? Are you getting rid of all?" He said, "No, playing all three of you." Like, what? Really? Yeah. So Shearer was really excited about joining United. Went back to Jack Walker and said, "Oh, Jack, I'm sorry, but I do feel it is time to move on. I've got the chance to go and play for Manchester United." And Walker said, "I'm sorry, the gentleman's agreement doesn't apply. You are not joining those effing bastards. You can join anybody else." But David was to be believed that Alex Ferguson recalled that Shearer sounded tearful on the phone when he rang up and said, "I'm sorry, but Mr. Walker won't let me leave." So he ended up going, you know, with a big fanfare, went back to Newcastle. So that's, and I've got no reason to disbelieve Mr. Meek on
no,
that.
absolutely not. He's got a history in the game. So.
But it's, you know, so we could have had him in '96. But again, who knows what would have, the way things were shaped up. Would we have got Dwight York and had the York and Andy Cole partnership we had? Possibly not. Not totally a believer that everything happens for a reason, but in terms of United, everything happens for a reason.
Tarad will go with the next question. So, Tarad.
All right, Chris, being foreign fans, especially not having access to being able to visit Old Trafford and, you know, watch the games live, how has it been for you to support the team going to Old Trafford through all these years, and how has that changed over time? Like, how was the fan base beforehand, and how is it nowadays, and what has been the major difference, and what do you think has caused that difference?
Well, the difference is that you can now get into the game 10 minutes before kickoff. In the 60s, you would have to start queuing at 12 o'clock to get into a game. You would do 3 hours to get into a match. Not every game, but most games. And that was just how it was, you know, with United games. Because I have to admit that I didn't go to so many games at Old Trafford then, as I mentioned earlier. My family moved to London, but my late father, God bless him, even though he wasn't a sport, always my interest in sport. And my dad would take me to virtually every game the United played in London. You know, so I'd go and get to see them play at West Ham and Spurs and Arsenal. And in fact, I didn't realise it at the time, but it would have been on occasion because of finances. He couldn't afford to come and watch the game with me himself. So he'd actually take me and let me go into the game. He'd find someone in the crowd or in the queue and say, will you look after my lad for me? And, you know, I'll see you outside the ground afterwards. And so I would go into these matches. Can you imagine doing that now? You'd have your children taken away from you, wouldn't you? The social services would be. But that was how it was. So you would have to be there, you know, at least a couple of hours before the match and jostle to keep your position. And then once you were allowed in, you know, you would take your place on the terraces with those barriers, which, you know, sadly caused so much, you know, so many deaths at Hillsborough later on. But they were used to keep you upright because there were so many people in there. But as a youngster, I would be allowed down to the front. There's a very famous Jimmy Greaves goal in 1964-65 season. They beat us 5-1 at White Hart Lane. We beat them 5-1 at Old Trafford. And Jimmy Greaves scored just an incredible goal. You will be able to find footage of it where he weaves through the United defence and taps the ball in the net. If it's ever shown, I'd tell my kids, that's me there, because I'm the only person not jumping up and down celebrating. But I was at the front because, again, you will probably have heard tales of how it used to be. And people would part for you. You know, the adults would say, oh, got a couple of kids. So as a child, you would get down right to the front and sort of have to be up on tiptoe because I was so small, holding on. It was a real test of strength to hang onto the wall and see over. So is that was through, but partly as I got older, you know, I had money where I could buy a seat and go and sit in a bit more comfort. And also because of the tragedy at Hillsborough, you know, the whole thing with all-seater stadiums changed. So it is a different experience. But that, in my view, is what hasn't killed the atmosphere, but it certainly suppressed it. Because I don't know about you guys, if we tried it now, all singing, you know, we might be a bit self-conscious, sat down, singing. If we were all to stand up, somehow or other, you feel more liberated and you don't feel so self-conscious about it. So that's the thing that I think has influenced, and the biggest difference I've seen going back to the 60s, it would just be non-stop singing, non-stop chanting, just noise. Maybe my memory's playing tricks, and, you know, as a childhood, everything's magnified, isn't it? So everything's bigger, everything seems louder. But it was just more, particularly nighttime matches. Night games are just fantastic. And I still feel that. I still get more of a buzz from a night game. But now it's almost sort of, I don't want to knock it because I think it's so easy. Oh, you know, was the golden era and were better. There's lots of things that weren't better. But the one thing that if I could change would be to have more singing. I mean, in the Stratford end as a season ticket holder, when I gave it up a couple of years ago when my son could no longer go and I didn't want to go on my own. But despite the regulations up in the back of it, we stood up all through the game. And you can sing and you can chant and you can shout. And it's a lot easier to do it that. Sitting down, I don't know, I think we're all more restrained and therefore that's why the atmosphere, although the atmosphere of the City game, can you remember when football used to be played, guys? Seems a long time ago now, doesn't it? But the atmosphere for the City game, how good was that? How good was that? Why can't we reproduce that Old Trafford game after game? I mean, I know part of the answer is because it was City and you know, we needed to win it. But if only we could do that, because definitely the players respond to that. I mean, I would say the best atmosphere that I've seen in the last few years was Real Madrid. Not the first time Ronaldo came, not the second time Ronaldo came back, but the first time when Mourinho was auditioning for the job of manager. That night was just incredible. Really was amazing. So that would say I did warn you that I would just run off the match. So that's the big.
It's brilliant.
That's the big difference. It's a lot more comfortable going to watch a game. It's a lot easier in terms of getting into and out of the ground. But apart from special nights, it's difficult to reproduce the atmosphere. I don't miss having my ribs crushed against those barriers though, because you did. Again, that's something that, you know, you'll regret it, and it did happen where the crowd would. You know, it didn't even have to be a goal. If United were attacking and got close to goal, there's just a natural thing that people. I mean, I do it when I'm sat at home watching television, I don't know if you guys do it, but the end that United are attacking, I find my body starts to lean that way when we're close to scoring. And I think it's the same physical thing when you were in a crowd back then when you were standing up. As the play got near you, you sort of gravity pulled on you and pulled you all forward. And so those to help prevent that.
Yeah.
So sadly played a part in Hillsborough.
Mm-hmm. So Hassan, do you have a question? And then I'll go with the last one.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting you mentioned atmospheres, Chris. I was going to ask you about that as well. That do you think, obviously, with like you mentioned to try this change from standing to all-seater stadia, and then obviously how much easier it is to get into games. In fact, I've had people who go to football tell me that it is actually like being in a coffee shop at the Emirates. They're not joking when they say it, because more and more people will get in and go for their cappuccino and go for their fancy bread and things. They treat it like a day out and not so much as like, being there necessarily to watch the footy. But with United, with these recent years, when we talk about the atmosphere, do you think a lot of it has to do also, we keep hearing about how Manchester United nowadays is mostly watched by tourists. We keep getting told that it's because everybody at the stadium is not from Salford or not from Manchester. I know we fly over groups of people from Ireland, because when I went to Ireland, everybody I met seemed to have a season ticket for Old Trafford. And they were there every Saturday, and they were going to the game while I was in Ireland to go and watch. So is there any truth to that? Because that's something we keep hearing from a lot of people. But it's changed also because it's tourists, it's people from down south, or it's people from other places, or Norway, or things like that, as opposed to the locals.
No, I don't buy into that, and I never have done. It's just too easy a thing to attack United and say, oh yeah, they don't have any fans from Manchester. For a start, 442 magazine did a survey some years back, and I think the distance they took was 20 miles, fans within 20 miles of the stadium, and Manchester United had a bigger percentage than any other club in there. So that I do think it's a fallacy. It's an easy thing to stick to beaters. And you're saying about Ireland, I had a golf trip to Ireland 2 years ago, I think it was, and flew back on the Saturday morning of the first day of the new season. And this was flying back to Leeds Bradford Airport. And I kid you not, I was the only player, the only passenger on board not wearing a Leeds United shirt. All, Irish people. Every club has, club has a big Irish following, a big Scandinavian. Oh, by the way, I found out, I did a DNA test recently. You're talking to a 10% Viking, so just behave yourself.
I read your tweet.
10% Viking, me. But yeah, every club has it, and I don't believe that has contributed to it. There definitely are a big percentage, or not a big percentage, a percentage of big first timers going there who but I don't knock them, because these guys, some of them, people say, oh, you've come from Pakistan, you've come from Japan, you've come from Sweden. I've come from 20 miles away. These guys are seriously committed in terms of paying money. If they could, the majority of them. I know you guys would be there every week if you could. Yeah. Absolutely, you'd be every week. So would most of us. So I'm not going to knock any of those, and I'm not going to knock them commercially, because that's what United that we do. We create this interest, and we have this interest, and people come over. But as to whether or not it affects the atmosphere, I don't believe so. Because I tell you what, if I've spent as much money as you guys do to go to a game, I'm going to sing my heart out. I mean, I do anyway, but I definitely am not going to go there and just sort of look around at faces in the crowd and not be part of it, and not want to be doing that. So I think it may be more a joint thing of apathy, because we had so much success. And, I have seen it over the years where if we weren't 3-0 up after 15 minutes, people would start getting on some of the players' backs. It's like we have an entitlement to win. And I think that's something that I know even my partner, she comes from Leeds, so she's a Leeds. But she says, "Oh, Manchester United fans, you're all so arrogant. You know, you all think you're entitled to win." And I know it's not true, but on the other hand, I know where she's coming from, because there are a certain percentage of people that are like that. And so there are that element that stay quiet, and they might have only come from 5 miles away. So I don't buy into that. That's the reason for the subdued atmosphere. Yeah, except that he's not playing well, he's not going to get the same sort of vocal support at some stages of a game or some stages of a season. That happens to every club. Every club has that. You know, even our noisy neighbours and that team from Anfield. You know, they'll get that as well. But the Emirates, I haven't been to the Emirates.
Seem to get a lot louder when they lose games. You know, that's the one thing I've always noticed. They're clapping them off and singing "You'll Never Walk Alone" more when they lose than as opposed to when they win.
Yeah, well, that could be the victim syndrome. I don't know, but yeah, that could be. But the thing I will say, and it's terrible for me to forgive me if this is offending everybody, but Liverpool I respect and admire, and I see them as our genuine rivals. Chelsea are bling, Manchester City are bling, and I'm sorry if that offends anybody. But the fact is that if Abramovich had, you know, he might have decided to. Well, he was trying to come to us, take us over, but he could have gone to West Ham, he could have gone to Tottenham, he could have gone to Arsenal. Sheikh Mansour and right on to Blackburn. You know, I respect Manchester City from the point of view they've always had a decent number of fans and a decent attendances, but they're not serious rivals. Liverpool and Arsenal also, utmost respect. Everything that they've achieved with their own money and through their own efforts. They haven't had it thrown at them. Yes, Manchester United have spent lots of money over the years. I know we have broken the transfer fee record so many times, but we spent our own money. We weren't spending other people's money. We generate that income. I mean, Chelsea, you're looking at 15,000 crowds they were getting. Not that, you know, certainly in the second half of my life, and maybe even in your guys' lifetime, you know, when you were children. You know, they're just appalling attendances, very poorly supported, considering all the success that they had in the 60s. And they were a mega club, massive club in the 60s. And if I could have picked one player from another team, I would have had to come join us. Back in then, it would have been Peter Osgood. Don't know if you guys have ever heard of him, but check him out if you haven't. He played for. What a player! What went to see Charlton along with a couple of guys I worked with, just because we all wanted to go and see Osgood play, even though he was then sort of not in his pomp anymore, but playing for Southampton. And they lost 4-1, but Osgood scored Southampton's goal, and it was an absolute worldie. Just cruised past these people and put it in the back of the net. So he's a run off of the
yeah. Okay, so my last question is going to be about Ole, and obviously we're going to sign off with the present state. Ole was hired a year ago. Before we had some experiences with Jose Mourinho, with Louis van Gaal, with David Moyes, obviously. So where do you see our club heading under Ole, and are you optimistic about our future, not just because you're a fan, but also with logic and with performances? Do you see a way back to where we used to be under Sir Alex with Ole?
Yeah, I do see a way back, because if you look at the base that he's working from now, as compared to what Sir Alex Ferguson was working with when he came in 1986. You know, if you compare those two, then you have to be more optimistic now than you would have been back then. That said, we had the season where it's jokingly referred to as Manchester United came the only team ever to come fourth in a two-horse race, because the 84-85 season was when we won our first 10 games, drew the 11th, and then eventually came fourth. And so we obviously had a pretty damn good side then, but it managed to slide. My personal theory is because we Ron Atkinson put too much emphasis on Robson. I believe that Robson probably was played when he shouldn't have played, and as a subsequence suffered more injuries than he should have done. But that precipitated a slide that we had and got us to the point, with the defeat at Oxford and Alex came in. And you would not, I think if you looked at that squad and compared it to what we have now, we have to have a much place to work from. Granted, the opposition is also stronger. What Liverpool have done this season, again, forgive me for saying this, but if we all look just as football fans, they've been playing phenomenal football, and I was just so grateful that Watford beat them and denied them the chance of being invincible again. But they're clearly an amazing side. But I've got renewed hope. I don't know about what you guys feel, but if somehow we could persuade Pogba, get inside Pogba's mind, get Pogba to play for us the way he's played for Juventus and France in recent years, wouldn't you think that we could almost do anything if you put him into that side? If Rashford hopefully is not as damaged as he could be with that back injury, that is a concern to me, to be honest. That is, anybody who's suffered with just a minor back complaint, to break your back in two places when you're a professional athlete. But if we can get him back, if we could get Pogba and a couple of the signings supposedly that we're after, I think we've got every reason to be optimistic. And if the Fernandes influence, just look, if you compared, there's something that David picked up on Sunday, within minutes almost of his first appearance. Because what we tend to do now, whereas we used to sit next to one another in the Stratford end, now it is just a constant stream of text between us. And within the first few minutes, he said, Dad, just look at the players around us. Look at the players responding. Look at how fast the players are moving. And then it was, Dad, look at Fernandes shouting at the other players. Look at him. He's phenomenal. And he's absolutely right. That you can see that the guy, he's got the passion of Keane. He clearly, almost the demands of Keane, and the skills of Cantona and Scholes. Is it too quick to go overboard? Yeah, maybe it is. But
no,
I just see great things in him, and he's a Manchester United fan, thanks to Ronaldo.
Yeah.
He understands the club. So if we can build on that, and get some players. I mean, what do you guys think? Do you think Pogba, we should just get shot and that there's no way back?
I don't think we should sell Pogba. Obviously, he's been injured all season. But once he's overcome his injury, I think he should come back in the side. And I think he will now enjoy playing more with our side, considering Bruno Fernandes is back. Fred has been phenomenal this season. The defense looks solid.
Yeah.
The attack looks good. Rashford has been phenomenal. Martial has been good as well. So I think Pogba will enjoy playing in this side more. And I think, according to the press, I don't know if it's true or not, but according to the press, one of his concerns was the quality of our side, the quality of players that we were buying and the quality of players that were in our side. Obviously, he's meant to make them better, but now I think he's got the side that he, being a world-class footballer, will love to play in.
Yeah, I hope you're right.
I think he would take, like you said, it's with Pogba, it's very important to get into his mind. I think if he buys into the project, and there's no way he's going to be able to coast haphazardly or sort of, absent-mindedly with Bruno there. Bruno's going to let him know. He's not going to care if it's Pogba. I don't think Bruno would care if it's Roy Keane. So I think Pogba would like that challenge, and he would like the idea that, okay, everyone's looking at Bruno and thinking he's the big fish. It's time for me to remind everybody who the real big fish is.
Right, yeah, good point. Yeah.
And I think he'd also like the challenge. And then if we can bring in Sancho, and we can have a really exciting front three, and like Ismaeel said, we've got Van Bissaka, we've got Maguire, Fred is flying. Pogba's looking around himself and saying, okay, this is a good side. I've got De Gea in goal, I've got Shaw playing the best football. I've been absent for no fault of his own, but he's been absent for almost a year. By the time he comes back, we could be, at some point in the next season, like you said, he has a chance to look at it and say, okay, well, I want people to see the Pogba who's a World Cup winner. I don't want them looking, oh, look, it's all Bruno, Bruno, Bruno. I want to go and prove it. And the thing is, it takes the burden off him. The creative burden comes off of him with Bruno there, with the possible signing of Sancho. It allows him to, Fred allows him with the amount of ground that he covers to maybe be a little bit more languid. And I think it just gives him, if he wants it, that's the most important.
That's the thing.
I think it gives him a canvas that he's been looking for since the day he signed. Because he signed on because of Mourinho and Ibra. And if you look back to it, he played some of his best football first when Ibra was there. I mean, Ibra missed a ton of chances that Pogba created for him also. But he liked the idea of Ibra the leader. And I think we've not had someone like that since Bruno came along. And then he played his best football under Mourinho and became second. He really did play some of his best football then. So if he wants to buy into it and he wants to really, grab the bull by the horns, he's got the canvas there. He can go down as one of the all-time greats in this team. He definitely can now. I don't think there'd be any excuses.
I'd like to add on to this. I think for the first time, Pogba has somebody in this midfield in which he has confidence in Bruno. Like, I can actually pass the ball to somebody and, get it back where I need it from.
Right.
Fred had also started, assisting a lot in the last few games. So now they've got a very good anchor where Pogba can pass and move. Whereas previously the onus was on Pogba that if he doesn't make the pass, the team doesn't proceed. And he felt he needed to run with the ball all the time. And that is where the over dribbling came in. That is where he started losing possession. And that is where the frustration started kicking in. But now he can pass the ball, move into more dangerous positions, get into shooting positions, pass it to more people in more attacking positions. So I think finally Pogba has a team around him that understands what fluid football is, will be more eager to attack, and won't be just happy sitting back and trying to nick a 1-0 game. And that is where the dangerous side of Pogba comes into play for us. So Bruno Fernandes would complement Pogba, and Pogba would love to play off of that energy.
Agreed.
Yeah, that's a great. Yeah, there's a great thing, Trad. The observation you make there. I think you're 100% right about the number of times he's lost possession, and that's the reason, because he felt like he had to do it on his own, and it slowed us down as well, because obviously one of the first things I was taught as a player was that the ball can move faster than you can. Which is a sort of simplistic way of saying always pass, and if you can. I mean that would then mean that we wouldn't have seen the likes of George Best or Ryan Giggs, but every rule has its exception, doesn't it? But that definitely, that's a good point, that if we could do that. But can we get inside his head again? What I don't understand is he clearly wanted to come back to us and, unfinished business and back to loved, because, you just saw the film of him going around and sort of seeing the canteen ladies at the training ground, and he was buzzing when he came back to us. I don't understand what it is, why that has been diluted or diminished or even just disappeared completely now. I don't understand it, but God, can you imagine if we could get him in the same team as Bruno and the others that are flying? I mean, defensively, I think Maguire and Wan-Bissaka, Wan-Bissaka probably, if I had a shirt nowadays, if I bought one name on the back,
a great
probably
signing
would be Wan-Bissaka.
Yeah.
Oh, he is just so, and I do think you can already see signs of him improving under Fernandes in getting forward, getting into those positions and doing something useful with his crossing is improving, but also he's played some delightful little cutbacks as well, just in the few games. So I think he can bring even more out of him, because I don't know that we could get much more out of him defensively. I mean, the guy, it's wonderful to watch, isn't it? It's almost as good to see United go forward. It's as good almost to see him just people up against him say, yeah, go on, try it. Like with Man Village, try a little trick. Not going to get past Aaron. No way you're going to get past him. So.
Okay, Chris, I've been reading some comments, and a lot of people have been really appreciative of you taking time out tonight. And
yes,
they've enjoyed this chat as well.
Thank you guys for thank you guys for inviting me, and for everybody that's thought it's worthwhile and listening. And it's just the thing that throughout my life, following Manchester United, the great thing is I just love meeting other Reds and talking to other Reds. And maybe it is the same with other clubs, but I don't think so. The passion among Manchester United fans and the love for the club. I mean, Shirley Part, she laughs at me because you say, "Oh, we talk about we." You say we did it. We won when we won the trophy. That's how you feel, isn't it? You do for whatever reason. Maybe this is just a football thing, but you feel that you're part of the club, and I feel like they're playing for me, and I'm sure you guys feel the same, that they're playing for you, and that is the real constant over. So what is it? I started in '61 when I was 5. So it's 60 years. Actually, it's 60 years this month since I started. I hadn't thought about that before. 60 years since I started support. So that will be the thing, and it's just great to meet Reds, and thanks for having me on here, and I hope that I haven't been too long-winded. And
it's been an education. It's absolutely been an education.
And any time you guys, it'd be great to be involved and listen to you, because I do. You guys are more on the ball now with things. I forget about stuff. I go to do something in another room, and I've forgotten by the time I get there. So you guys remember everything. David is phenomenal. He will remember everything that happened in the game, every minute. He remembers all the goal scorers, and it's good to hear you guys and hear you young guys and how enthusiastic you are.
Yeah, we hope to have both of you soon as well on this show. So
absolutely, I think I know I speak on behalf of Ismaeel and Trad. If you ever get a chance, please, both of you, come to Pakistan. You'd love it.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. I've travelled enough. I haven't been to Asia. Something that's on my list, as I'm getting a diminished amount of time left for me. Without getting too morbid, but there's things I need to do. But otherwise, you guys stay safe as well. You look after yourselves and your families, because it's a tough time for all you guys. And at least I'm used to just being here, living alone and living in my flat. But you guys have got careers, and I don't know how. Trad, you say you haven't got any children yet. What about you guys, Hassan and Ismaeel? Have you got children?
Yeah, we both have a son each. Yeah.
Well, it's difficult times for you, and you'll get through it, and we'll all get through it throughout the world. And let's look forward to.
I've got mine halfway through. He's just a little bit over 3. I've got him halfway through the lyrics of "Glory, Glory, Man United." So I've been putting this time to good use. And he walks around now with his little Fred the Red everywhere. And people are like, "Oh, that's a nice teddy bear," and he goes, "It's not a teddy bear, it's Fred." So there you go. That's my boy. My job here is done. So I've been utilizing this time well.
Yeah, I named my kid
likewise, you guys,
so that when he grows up, he doesn't have a choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, mine definitely didn't. But yeah, you guys, I've got a very modest home here, but it's not that far from Manchester. So if anybody ever wanted a base, if they did manage to come over here and go to a game,
absolutely, we'll
be more than welcome to. All right, guys. Well, thanks ever so much.
Okay, then.
Thank you so much, Chris. Have a good
Thanks
one.
A lot.
Yeah.
No, you too. Look after
Take
yourself.
care. Thank you so much. Thank you for this.
All right.
Bye.
Then. Goodbye.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.